And we're back again. GPS Live, April 5th, 2024. It's a whole new month, Jonathan.
It is indeed. I'm very excited. New
The world
month,
is
new quarter, new stories, new excitement.
the world is replete with possibilities. Is replete the right word there? I think replete's the right word there.
Honestly, I don't even know what that word means.
I don't know. It's one of those words I'm just vibing with the definition of. We're just going to figure it out as we
Like the
go.
SAT words.
Thank you so much for joining us for another week of GPS Live. We're just going to be discussing some cybersecurity news stories that we've found. If it's your first time tuning in, that's what this is. We find some cybersecurity news stories that are interesting to us, that we think there are some details about that that might set them apart from the average story, and we talk about it. My name's Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And today we've got some interesting stories lined up for you. But before we dive into them, it's important that we clarify that the views and opinions expressed by Jonathan and I are our own. They do not necessarily reflect the official views and opinions of GuidePoint Security. For that, you have to go places like our blog and to our white papers and talk directly to our founders and our partners. Jonathan and I, we're just a couple guys having fun talking about cybersecurity stories. If you are joining live, thank you so much. If you're tuning in video on demand, sometime after Friday, again, thank you for giving us your time. Regardless of how you're doing it, we love to see your comments come in on these. We love to interact with you about the stories that we're talking about and get ideas for future stories that we can cover. But with that being said, Jonathan, you doing all right?
I'm doing really well. It's been a lovely week. The weather is amazing. I'm having such a great time hanging out, reading all the interesting things going on this week, hacking the planet as usual, and also making up fun titles for ourselves.
Making up fun titles for ourselves. You're a Docker in a container. I can move containers. We've got this going. All right. So why don't we just go ahead and jump in then with our first story. This one's interesting. This is specifically about the oil and gas sector, the oil and gas industry. The story itself is actually a little bit light on oil and gas, which is, I think, one of the reasons that we were drawn to this one. Is the headline and the story kind of diverge from each other as far as what the actual focus is, but the main focus of the story is much more interesting. So, Jonathan, what is our first story?
Well, coming to us from the Hacker News, there is a new phishing campaign supposedly targeting, like you said, oil and gas. But there's something more sinister going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Deep beneath the covers, it's being discovered that a piece of malware that's focused on information stealing, so gathering all that stuff on your computer and shipping it off to the bad people, known as Rhodomanthus.
Yeah. Take a second, collect yourself, look at all of the consonants.
Thank you. It seems to have a bit of a fingerprint tied to another well-known group and something that we've talked about a lot here on the show, known as Lockbit.
Yes. Lockbit. The infamous ransomware gang that operates most like a business, but has had its fair share of ups and downs over the last several years. Most recently, being taken down, quote unquote, by a multinational operation who of government entities that overtook some of their servers and websites, specifically their leak websites. And took that infrastructure down and started leaking information about the core structure of Lockbit. But they have come back, and this campaign is using, like you said, that Rhodomanthus malware, which is an info stealer. But the interesting thing about it is that in 2023, so August of 2023, so not that far back, less than a year ago, a Rhodomanthus variant came bundled with a leaked Lockbit payload alongside some other things like a cryptocurrency miner and others. So there was this bundle of malware associated with Lockbit that came out with this Rhodomanthus malware attached to it. And now there is a new updated version of Rhodomanthus that is circling around, and specifically, according to the Hacker News, being used to target oil and gas.
Yeah. And so it's not just this, coincidence of a combination where a tool that we're seeing today was part of the infamous Lockbit ransomware group, but also it comes down to the timing. With Lockbit recently being taken down, as you mentioned, this Rhodomanthus malware was within days actively being used in the wild. And it does a couple different things. One, it's taking advantage of compromised servers, and what they're doing is they're sending out mass bulk emails to get people to visit malicious phishing pages. And once you visit those malicious phishing pages, they coax you into downloading the malicious payloads to ultimately steal the data off your system. But there's just a lot of timing and overlap and segments of code that are kind of tying a lot of this together. And it just goes back to things that we've discussed on this show about how taking down of ransomware groups, while is great, we tend to see them simply pop back up. And it's not just one of those whack-a-mole scenarios where 10 new ones come back, but because of the code and because of the modules and the components being so similar and so relatable to each other, it's often, suppose that are these same people involved in this, or are the same threat actors simply just disappearing and reappearing under a new guise?
Mm-hmm. And just for a little bit more detail, like you mentioned, right? It's your typical phishing, right? Link in an email goes to a URL shortener to obfuscate. PDF gets downloaded. Click on the PDF. It's not a PDF. It downloads malware, right?
Mhm.
That's been since time immemorial the chosen method. Specifically though, when it comes to targeting oil and gas, in this is a kind of an interesting approach. The emails that are being crafted are specifically spoofing Federal Bureau of Transportation documents and communications, and going out, and they're specifically referencing vehicle incidents, right? So like accidents and like an employer notifying you that there has been an incident. In the oil and gas sector, that's obviously pretty huge because you're transporting large amounts of sometimes toxic chemicals.
Didn't we just see a container ship hit a bridge?
It's just a container ship hit a bridge.
Yeah, so incidents are very peak right now.
Vehicle incidents are very peak. In fact, actually, I will be very curious to see if anyone is launching any kind of research into phishing related incidents, specifically about the Baltimore bridge, right? Where was there a campaign in Baltimore related to that? That'd be interesting to see down the line. But yeah, so there are variations on this email, but they're all kind of trying to target that oil and gas sector by bringing in information that is unique to that sector as something that they would care about and want to click into, and perhaps kind of bring down that barrier of entry for someone saying like, oh, does this look suspicious, right? This is, oh, I get these kind of notifications all the time from my employer, Federal Bureau of Transportation, vehicle accident. Let me go ahead and take a look at that. So yeah, headlines, email subjects like attention needed, your vehicle's collision, insistent care required, review information about your car accident, which all makes this sound like your vehicle has somehow been hit by someone. But yeah, it is interesting to see, like you mentioned, right? Lockbit gets their little kind of hiccup in the road. And then suddenly this malware that was bundled with Lockbit as early as just the end of last year suddenly gets used to target a very lucrative sector.
Yeah, and this is not the only part of it, right? This particular campaign does include a couple other smaller components, things that are involved in the data stealing, but also some other forms of malware that are distributed as part of these attacks. In fact, one of them, called Agent Tesla malware, that is part of these attack chains. What's interesting about that one, it was found to be secured by something called Cassandra Protector. And now if anybody is in the reverse engineering game out there, shout out to AT&T, this particular securing tool is meant to make it more difficult to reverse engineer, which is the process of breaking the malware down to its initial functionality to understand exactly what it's doing as a program. And by wrapping it with these kinds of protection tools, it's stuff like anti-debugging, which makes it difficult to understand what's going on in the program, and anti-reverse engineering, which makes it difficult to understand kind of that source code perspective. Clearly, there's extra initiatives that are put into place to really make it difficult for researchers to get a grasp of the depth and the capability of a lot of these tools. But that always makes it a fun new challenge for researchers in the malware space. So pretty interesting stuff in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting development as we see that. We're going to keep an eye, obviously, on this, especially with the Lockbit angle of it, right? That caused major disruption, and we do have another GuidePoint Research and Intelligence Team report coming out. I believe I just want to check to make sure I've got the date right, but I believe it's the 18th. Yeah, the 18th. Of this month will be the quarterly report, which will be covering things like Lockbit's takedown and follow-on effects, and the expert analysis that the GuidePoint Research and Intelligence Team, also known as GRIT, what they believe that is going to lead to. So with that, though, let's go ahead and jump to our next story, specifically in this case, about how it's almost like a Who Watches the Watchmen kind of deal right now, right? So with this one in particular, a misconfigured wiki, a old architecture misconfigured wiki, led to an internal data leak, or led to a data leak for OWASP, the OWASP Foundation, which is the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. So Application Security Project gets hit with a breach caused by poor application security, which
it's a really weird kind of scenario here, but the de facto, I would say, authors of this internet security standards have been kind of dealing with their own issues. Now, OWASP, as many of our viewers may have ever heard of, especially if you do any kind of application development or website development, is an international nonprofit. In fact, over here in Tampa Bay, I happen to be one of the co-leaders of our local OWASP chapter. Please do check out your local area. But the point is that OWASP recently changed web servers recently, or web applications recently, and they moved away from a platform called MediaWiki. MediaWiki is best known because it's what Wikipedia runs on. It's open source, and so this old web server was found to have a couple of misconfigurations left behind in it. Realistically, these kind of things happen. But for the people preaching to monitor your misconfigurations and make sure everything is A-OK, it's an interesting turn of events.
It's an interesting turn of events. I like the way that they handled it specifically on their announcement on Twitter, which was on April 1st. They actually had to say, this is not a joke. we did have a data breach in late March, because it is, right, it does feel very like the news cycle has become satire itself, right? You would almost expect to see this on something like The Onion, right? Organization responsible for making sure that X doesn't happen has X happen. But specifically with this, one of the important things that they point out is that current membership data remains secure, right? The re-architecture that they went through did not expose current membership. This is specifically regarding resumes that had been sent in between 2006 and 2014. So as you mentioned, Jonathan, you are the leader of the local chapter where you are. And so for membership in the past, between that 2006 2014 timeframe, members applying had to send in their resume with all of their information on it in order to establish, hey, I actually have connections to what OWASP cares about. And that is the information that was in this misconfigured wiki, this stuff that was left up. So they are taking the proper steps, right? They, like you said, they have purged those from their system. They've gone through and fixed up all these holes, but they've also taken a step that honestly hadn't, I'm almost ashamed to say, hadn't actually occurred to me.
In
the past,
like a 10x engineer here with this one.
Yeah, like this is a very good thing. They take the step of reaching out to the web archive and requesting that all cached versions of those pages be purged as well. And that's something that honestly never occurred to me, is like, oh yeah, if your information is published publicly in a data breach, Web Archive keeps that stuff if someone just clicks, oh yeah, save this, right? So that's just a way that stuff is out there forever. Like, when you're younger, and our generation growing up, and our parents cautioning, like, oh, you put it online, it's out there forever. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's always been true, but it never occurred to me really that it's like, oh yeah, there's a whole separate archive that I have to go to that's just cataloging these things.
It is. It's an incredible afterthought, and it's something I'm going to be adding to my little ace up my sleeve when it comes to compromised websites and leaked data that's going to kind of reminisce for a long time. But just to keep everybody in the clear, the configuration allowed for a directory to be accessed, and all of the files therefore could be seen. So that is long gone. The archives are long gone. They even went as far to purge all the cache from Cloudflare, so that is long gone. And yeah, it also adds to the fact that responsible disclosure goes a long way, and also communicating that you have some kind of a breach goes a long way. Without foreshadowing too much, making sure that your customers, your consumers, your users are aware of what's going on. They understand the implications. They understand what their responsibility in this is. One of my favorite terms recently is a racing model, right? And as a user, you also play a responsibility in kind of helping with that cleanup. And understanding what components of your data are now out there on the internet as part of a leak. And so, it's, yeah, April Fool's kind of came up quickly on us. But no joke. And so I personally wanted to highlight this story again with my ties to OWASP, and just as you said, right? Hey, don't do this. This happens.
Right. And also, an important thing that they mention on there is that even though this is from 2006 to 2014, they've purged your information, they've taken care of that, but they do put also the caveat on there that, like, hey, if you haven't changed your phone number or your email address that was on that resume since 2014, you do need to be cautious now, right? You have to exercise a little bit more caution with any suspicious emails, any mail that shows up at your address, because your physical address could have been on your resume, and phone calls, right? So good on OWASP for taking care of that as quickly as they did, and disclosing it as quickly as they did as well. But speaking of prompt and speedy disclosure, let's move to our next story, which is an object lesson in, I would say probably an object lesson in what not to do when it comes to a data breach. So this is actually an interesting kind of theme for the main stories this week, is like the return of old things. Radamanthus, an old piece of malware, coming back as a newly updated version post the Lockbit takedown. OWASP's, an old wiki configuration exposed data from an old requirement that ended in 2014. This one, however, we've kind of got a pair of stories here, and we're using this one to launch into it, is AT&T is currently facing several class action lawsuits that have been filed in regards to their admission that a massive data breach exposed 73 million current and former customers' information.
That is absolutely correct. Many of our viewers may have seen something like this that's going on in the news regarding the data breach, but the spin on it is this lawsuit speaking specifically to how we got here in the first place. Correct about this being old. We're talking 2021 old, where there was a data breach that took place. It was published back 3 years ago. But it took some time to get to where we're at today, specifically AT&T coming forward and admitting that this data, actually came from their systems. There was a number of different events that happened a couple years ago, and now threat actors are leaking samples of this database on hacking forums and going as far to say this is authentic, this is real. Initially, AT&T came back and said that they're currently looking into this, but does not appear to originate from them, but following a more formal investigation, we are where we're at today, which is admittance. But that's not just the end of it.
It's not the end of it. So like you mentioned, this is several years old, right? Back in 2021 was when the original data breach occurred, and AT&T said, "Hey, this isn't this isn't data that's originating from us," when it was coming out, and it was in March 17th of this year, so 2024, that a threat actor named Major Nelson leaked the entire database, not just the samples, but the entire database of that alleged breach back in 2021. And he just released it on a hacking forum for free. Said this is the same one that came from that breach. And so AT&T admitted on March 30th, 2024, just to get into the details about it, that those 7.6 million account holders and 65.4 million former account holders, so a massive amount of people. But not only that, it also not only identifiable information, right, like name, date of birth, email address, social security numbers, all that kind of stuff that you would expect to see there, but also their AT&T passcodes. So potentially direct access to those AT&T accounts to get like customer support and change information, right? So I would almost expect to see, as a result of this, an upswing in verified AT&T numbers calling you about your car warranty. That should be coming shortly. But I think what you were trying to get at there with the last thing you said, kind of the little twist on this, is specifically where these lawsuits are coming from and what is related to them. So the main lawsuit that has been filed filed by the same law firm that just recently handled the incognito privacy lawsuit against Google, which you may have seen in the news as well. They just came to a settlement, and Google has agreed to delete the data of 136 million users because they were actually tracking what happened in incognito mode. But that also is something that came up 4 years ago and started the fight then.
Yeah, one of the key details here, and this is something that can apply to a lot of our viewers, especially from a business risk and enterprise perspective,
Yep.
is that the complaint against AT&T directly infers that not just inadequate security measures, but the failure to provide timely and adequate notice about the breach to exposed customers is what is really happening here. And especially with things like the SEC changes requiring 4 days notification when you identify that a breach has occurred, to taking responsibility in a breach and making sure that you have some sense of public notice in cases like this, where it's a massive, large company with millions of customers involved. And so specific to the fact of that, provide timely and adequate notice, being a key detail in the lawsuit, in this argument, does put a lot of people that are maybe business owners or businesses that hold a lot of data and kind of in a weird risk position to think about, well, if something were to happen to me, am I prepared to speak to this? Do I even know where to get this information, and how can I track it down? It just leads to a whole bunch. And you kind of started to hint there, because we do have that second story coming in right behind it with the Google browsing data. Now, the joke we were literally talking about this before the show was, who would have thought incognito mode
was not
still track your data?
Yeah, who would have thought the largest data tracking and aggregation company in the world, apart from maybe Meta, right, was still tracking your data when they said that they weren't. So yeah, it's I think that the thing that's important here is thinking about it from a like you were saying, a business lens, right? Your data privacy, your data security, the ways that you're protecting the actual data of your users. Now, I don't believe in Google's case, right, there was any specific breach or anything that led people to go, wait, that info shouldn't be out there. That was incognito. It's just someone found out. Just trust. Yeah, someone said, oh, I realized that they are tracking my information still. That came out. And people said, well, you advertised this as zero tracking. You said that it was completely, completely anonymous. And so it brings in the side of that coin that also came from AT&T, right? Is saying or is looking at it and saying, hey, you are responsible for the data that you collect, and you are also responsible for keeping the people who you're collecting from, uh, you know, aware and fully cognizant of what you are collecting and how you are protecting it. In AT&T's case, right, that data was not protected adequately, and so so it was leaked and stolen, and now you have 70 million plus people, right? Was that the number? Yeah, 73 million customers and former customers, right, who are now dealing with the knock-on effects of this. With Google's incognito mode, right, there may not be necessarily negative repercussions from that, but there actually very well could be in some cases, right? You think about the fact that um, you know, it is not uncommon these days, right, for information to enter legal filings, or for someone to be under a legal, a court case. It's something that's negatively impacting them, and things like, oh, your internet search history, this, the websites that you went to being brought against you as evidence, even if it may be unrelated entirely, right? Like maybe you were curious one day about XYZ, you went and you Googled it, now you're involved in this, but they say, oh, there's a link here, something like that, right? If you were in incognito mode, looking for things like, and Google had that information stored, and then a court order comes in saying turn over all information about this person's browsing history, right? Suddenly that can be used against you. That could be good if you are guilty of the thing that you're accused of, but also people go into incognito mode to look for stuff sometimes, right? They're just like, yeah, just don't need this associated with my normal history. I don't want this to be part of like what Google thinks my algorithm wants, right? And so it's really interesting to look at it from that data privacy, data security model, where it's how are you protecting the data? How are you keeping it secure? How are you making sure that only the right people access that information? But then as a part of those two components is also how are you keeping your customers aware and abreast of all the changes about the data that you are protecting?
Yeah. And as we're coming up here to the top of the hour, right, this discussion can continue on. We'd love to hear your comments down below. We do read them actively during the show, along with after too. And so we try to keep abreast of everything going on that you want to talk about. So please do not shy away from that. But what do you think? Do you think we got a couple little last minute teasers we can throw in?
We can throw in, I think, just a couple rapid fire stories here that that we've found. Let me get through all of the Googling that I did for other information related to stories.
Hold on while I track that data for you.
Yep. So so coming to us from Security Week, the company Survey Llama had a data breach that impacted 4.4 million users. It is a survey rewards platform. The reason that we didn't feel we really needed to dive too deeply into this story is there wasn't really that much setting it apart, but from an organizational security standpoint, right? We know that we are talking to people who are responsible for data security at companies, and companies love to send out surveys through survey platforms. So if you have a account, and you're using that for this kind of information, again, going back to data privacy and data security, making sure that kind of supply chain style attack, right? Making sure that the survey companies that you are using are also secure and are securely storing the data that you are asking customers to submit to you through that platform. So 4.4 million users impacted there. And then this one's actually, this could have been one of our main stories, I think. But the U.S. Cancer Center City of Hope has a data breach impacting 800,000 individuals. This one includes their personal and health information that was compromised in that data breach. And we've seen this before with ransomware groups targeting, specifically this was not necessarily ransomware, but we've seen ransomware groups in the past target healthcare because that is such sensitive information that they are legally supposed to be responsible for and protecting very specifically. So if targets or targeting against healthcare, I think is probably going to be something that we see a lot more of because there's so much regulation around that industry. It makes for a pretty juicy target if you want to extort them in some way.
Yeah. And in my rapid fire segment here is Windows 10 is coming after you because they want you to update to Windows 11 if you haven't noticed yet. But just keep in mind that next year there is an EOL planned. They're going to offer an extended purchase opportunity for security updates. But generally, any computer released after 2018, as from a CPU perspective, should have a TPM chip in it, which is part of one of those hardware requirements to upgrade to Windows 11. If you're tired of being bugged about it, it's only going to get worse. Do consider your upgrade plans in your enterprise. We saw this with Windows 7, big old push. It is currently free if you have Windows 10 to upgrade to Windows 11, but do make sure that your hardware is supported. And if it's not, that refresh may be coming sooner than you hoped.
Maybe something you have to deal with. But thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of April 5th, 2024. We will catch you next week. But until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will see you back here next time. I forgot to have the video queued up once again. All right, here we go.